She thought the divorce had taken everything. What he forgot, and what she never knew existed, would change her life forever. If you've ever felt like you've hit rock bottom, like the story's over, I need you to stick with me for this. Subscribe if you believe in second chances, because this is one of those stories, and I want to build a community of people who get it. The final box was taped with a neatness that felt like a personal insult. It was Mark's neatness, not mine. My life was a jumble of half-finished projects and books with cracked spines. His was a world of crisp labels and color-coded files. The box was labeled Clara Personal Effects. It held 2 sweaters, a framed photo of my parents he'd never liked, and a chipped mug from a college trip. Everything else, the furniture we'd chosen, the art we'd collected, the house itself, was no longer mine. The settlement papers had called it an equitable distribution. My lawyer, a tired woman named Ms. Davies, who seemed perpetually disappointed in the institution of marriage, had called it a bloodbath. I just called it the end. I stood in the echoing hallway of what had been our home for a decade. The movers had been efficient, their politeness a thin veneer over their hurry to be done with the quiet misery of the place. Mark wasn't there, of course. He'd orchestrated this entire dismantling from his new condo downtown, a place with floor-to-ceiling windows and, I imagined, no chipped mugs. He had communicated only through his lawyer, a man with a smile as sharp and sterile as a scalpel. They had argued that his financial contributions outweighed mine tenfold. They had spreadsheets. They had pie charts. They had a narrative of my incompetence, my financial naivety, my status as a dependent. I had memories which held no currency in a courtroom. I had the vague, sinking feeling of having been expertly hollowed out over the years. My confidence and agency eroded so slowly I hadn't even noticed until I was standing in the cavern of my own life, holding a box of scraps. "That's the last of it, Mom," one of the movers said, his voice gentle. I nodded, unable to form words. He didn't look at me directly, a kindness I was grateful for. People averted their eyes from fresh grief, from the raw spectacle of a life being publicly disassembled. I signed the final paper he held out on a clipboard, my hand shaking slightly. The signature looked like a stranger's. As the heavy front door clicked shut behind them, the silence in the house became a physical presence. It was the kind of quiet that buzzes in your ears, the sound of absence. For 10 years, this house had been filled with noise, music, arguments, laughter, the low hum of the television. Now it was a museum of a life I no longer lived. I walked through the empty rooms, my footsteps loud on the hardwood floors. Sunlight streamed through the clean windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, the tiny ghosts of our life together. In the kitchen, I ran a hand over the cold granite countertop where I'd rolled out dough for countless pies, where we'd left notes for each other, where I'd once cried over a broken dish until he'd told me to stop being so sentimental. He'd called me sentimental a lot. It was his word for anyone who valued something that couldn't be appraised. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a harsh, unwelcome sound. It was Ms. Davies. I almost let it go to voicemail, but some flicker of responsibility, a habit I hadn't yet shed, made me answer. "Clara," she said, her voice flat and businesslike. "Just confirming the transfer is complete. He has possession." "I know," I said, looking out the window at the perfectly manicured lawn. "I'm here." "Right. Well, there's one other thing, a loose end. It came to my office this morning, addressed to you in my care. It's from your father's estate." My breath caught. My dad had been gone for 5 years. His estate, as far as I knew, had consisted of a failing hardware store, a mountain of debt, and a fishing boat that hadn't been seaworthy for a decade. My mother had passed long before him, and after he died, I'd been the one to sift through the wreckage. Mark had been so helpful then, so decisive. He'd handled the creditors, sold the boat for scrap, and liquidated the store's remaining inventory. "There's nothing left of my father's estate," I said, my voice thin. "Mark and I paid off the last of his business debts 3 years ago." "Apparently there is," Ms. Davies said. There was a rustle of paper on her end. "It seems your father set up a blind trust years ago, a very small one. It held a single asset, a piece of property. The trust was structured to dissolve and transfer the deed to you directly upon the dissolution of your marriage." I leaned against the counter, my knees feeling weak. What property? Where?" "It's a rural county. The address is, let me see, 14 Hemlock Lane. It's small, less than an acre. The records list a single outbuilding described as a smokehouse. It's not valued at much. Given the location, it's probably worthless. Your father purchased it 25 years ago. 25 years ago, I was a child. Blackwood County." The name was a faint bell ringing in the back of my mind, a place he used to go on hunting trips with his friends. long before his health started to fail, a smokehouse. I had no memory of it. Why would he do that? I whispered. Why hide it? And why link it to this? I can't speak to his motivations, Clara, Ms. Davies said, her tone softening for the first time. The documents are clear, however. The deed is now in your name. It was never a marital asset, so your ex-husband has no claim to it. It's yours. Free and clear. I have the keys and the paperwork here. You can pick them up whenever you're ready. I hung up the phone, my mind reeling. A smokehouse, a piece of land. It was nothing, a worthless scrap of forgotten earth, and yet it was something. It was the only thing in the world that was mine. I looked down at the box in my hands. Clara, personal effects. Maybe this was the last one. I drove for 3 hours, away from the city's clean geometric lines and into the rolling, untidy heart of the country. The highway eventually gave way to a 2-lane road that wound through dense forests of pine and oak. The sky was a vast, bruised purple with the coming evening, and the air that whipped through my open window smelled of damp earth and wood smoke. It smelled like my father. Blackwood County wasn't so much a place as a suggestion. There were no grand welcome signs, just a gradual thinning of houses and a thickening of trees. The towns had names like Mill Creek and Stone Crossing, clusters of tired-looking buildings huddled around a single blinking traffic light. I stopped at a gas station that also served as a grocery store and post office. The man behind the counter had a face like a road map of the county, all deep lines and weathered skin. He gave me directions to Hemlock Lane with a mixture of curiosity and disinterest. Not much out that way, he said, bagging up the bottle of water and bag of chips I'd bought. Used to be Old Man Hemlock's property, but his kids sold it off in pieces years ago. Hemlock Lane was more of a dirt track than a road, a narrow ribbon of packed earth carved between towering trees. My small car bucked and scraped over rocks and ruts. The branches of overgrown trees clawed at the windows, and for a moment I was seized by a primal fear, a feeling of being swallowed by the wilderness. I thought about turning back. What was I even doing here? Chasing a ghost? Pinning my hopes on a derelict shed in the middle of nowhere? But the image of that empty house, of Mark's condescending pity, pushed me forward. I had nowhere else to go. The property appeared abruptly, a break in the trees, a sagging wire fence choked with weeds, and a rusted metal gate hanging crookedly from a single hinge. I pulled over, my car's engine ticking in the sudden profound silence. I got out and pushed the gate open. It screamed in protest. The driveway was almost completely reclaimed by nature, 2 faint tracks disappearing into a meadow of knee-high grass and wildflowers. At the end of it, nestled under the dark canopy of a massive oak tree, was a small, dilapidated cabin. Its porch was tilted at a precarious angle, and several shingles were missing from the roof, leaving dark, gaping patches. It looked sad and forgotten, and beyond it, partially hidden by a stand of birch trees, was the smokehouse. It was a simple, windowless structure made of dark, weathered wood and river stones, with a steeply pitched roof and a squat stone chimney. It was sturdier than the cabin, more solid, as if it had been built for a purpose that time couldn't easily erase. It looked ancient and secretive. I walked toward it, the tall grass brushing against my jeans. The air was cool and still. The only sound was the chirping of crickets and the distant call of a bird. This was my inheritance, a collapsing cabin and a stone hut. It was absurd. I started to laugh, a broken, hysterical sound that was quickly swallowed by the woods. I laughed until tears streamed down my face, tears of grief and anger and the sheer, ridiculous tragedy of it all. I was a 34-year-old woman with a useless degree in art history, a failed marriage, and a portfolio consisting of one crumbling smokehouse. Mark would find this hilarious. He would see it as the perfect, pathetic coda to my story. The key Ms. Davies had given me was old and heavy, made of iron. There were 2 on the ring, one smaller and brass, fit the lock on the cabin's front door. The other, larger and black with rust, was for the smokehouse. I tried the cabin first. The door groaned open into a single room thick with the smell of dust and decay. A film of grime covered everything. There was a simple cot against one wall, a small wood-burning stove, and a table with 1 chair. It was a hunting shack, nothing more. It was clear no one had been here in a very long time. I backed out, not wanting to disturb the dead air within. Then I walked to the smokehouse. The door was made of thick, heavy planks of wood bound with iron straps. The lock was huge and ornate, the kind you'd see on a treasure chest. I slid the iron key into the keyhole. It felt like I was turning a gear in some ancient machine. The lock resisted, then gave way with a deep, satisfying clunk. I pulled the heavy door open. A wave of cold, dry air washed over me, carrying a faint, pleasant scent I couldn't quite place. Not smoke, something else, cedar and old paper. The inside was dark, the only light filtering through the cracks in the door. I fumbled for my phone, turning on its flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a small stone-walled room, perhaps 10 feet square. The floor was packed earth. The walls were lined with hooks where cured meats would have once hung. But the center of the room was dominated by a large, flat-topped steamer trunk, made of dark wood and bound with brass. It wasn't dusty, it was clean, as if it had been wiped down recently. My heart started to pound. This wasn't just an outbuilding. This was a storage vault, a safe. My father had built a safe. On top of the trunk was a single thick manila envelope. My name was written on it in my father's familiar, blocky handwriting. Clara. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The paper was crisp, not brittle with age. I tore it open. Inside was a letter, several pages long, and a smaller sealed envelope. I sat down on the edge of the trunk, my phone's light illuminating the page, and began to read. My dearest Clara, the letter began. If you are reading this, it means 2 things. First, I am gone, and for that I am sorry. I hope my passing was peaceful, and I hope you have had time to grieve. Second, it means your marriage to Mark is over, and for that, my girl, I am not sorry at all. I had to stop and take a breath. My father had never said a word against Mark. He had been polite, reserved, even friendly in his own quiet way. He'd shaken Mark's hand at our wedding, smiled for the pictures, and given him a ridiculously expensive bottle of scotch as a welcome to the family gift. To read these words now felt like a betrayal and a relief all at once. I am not a man who interferes, the letter continued. I was raised to believe you let people make their own choices, their own mistakes. And I saw from the very beginning that Mark was your mistake. I saw the way he looked at you, not with love, but with a kind of appraisal, like you were a new acquisition he was proud of, something to be polished and displayed. I saw how he subtly corrected you in front of others, how he dismissed your passions as hobbies, how he managed your life until you started to believe you were incapable of managing it yourself. He was a thief of a different sort, Clara. He didn't just want your money, he wanted your light. I saw him stealing it, bit by bit, and it was the hardest thing in the world to stand by and watch. Tears welled in my eyes, blurring the words he had seen. He had seen it all and said nothing. I felt a surge of anger, quickly followed by a wave of understanding. What could he have said? I wouldn't have listened. I was in love. I was convinced of my own brilliant judgment. So I did the only thing I could think of, he wrote. I made a plan, a lifeboat. This place, this little scrap of land, is your lifeboat. I bought it the year after your mother died. I was lost then, adrift in my own grief, and I knew that one day you might feel the same. I needed to build you a harbor. The hardware store was already failing. The debts were piling up. I knew there would be nothing left for you when I was gone, and I couldn't bear that thought. So I started squirreling things away. Every time I had a little extra cash from a side job, every time I sold a piece of old equipment the bank didn't know about, I put it aside. Not much, but something. It's in the trunk. But this place, this land is the real gift. Mark is a man who deals in assessed values and market rates. He would never see the point of a forgotten acre in the woods with no mineral rights and a crumbling shack. He deals in spreadsheets, not soil. That's why I knew he'd never find it. His greed has a very narrow focus. I had my lawyer, old Mr. Abernathy, a man who understood the value of a well-kept secret, draw up the trust. The terms were specific. The deed would only pass to you if you were no longer married to that man. It was my way of betting on you, Clara, betting on your strength. I knew that someday the woman I raised, the fierce, independent girl who wasn't afraid of anything, would re-emerge. I knew you'd find your way out, and I wanted there to be a place for you to land when you did. I was sobbing now, deep, shuddering breaths that echoed in the small stone room. The grief for my father, which I thought had softened into a dull ache, was suddenly sharp and new again. It was a grief mixed with a profound, overwhelming gratitude. He hadn't abandoned me to my fate. He had been standing by in secret building a refuge. The letter went on, explaining the practicalities. There was a small generator in the cabin. The well pump was old but reliable. He'd paid the property taxes in advance for a decade. He told me about the trunk and what I would find inside. He ended the letter with a final, heart-wrenching paragraph. This isn't just a place, Clara. It's a choice. You can sell it. Take the money, what little there is, and start over somewhere new. No one would blame you, or you can stay. You can put your hands in this dirt and build something that is yours and yours alone. Something no one can appraise or take away from you. Your mother and I, we never had much, but we had that. We had a life we built with our own 2 hands. That is the only real wealth. Whatever you choose, know that I am proud of you. Know that I always was. Love, Dad. I folded the letter, my hands shaking so badly I could barely manage it. I looked at the trunk. It was my father's last gift, his final act of faith in me. I placed my hand on the cool brass latch. It wasn't locked. I lifted the heavy lid. The smell of cedar and money filled the small space. The trunk was filled with cash, neat, tight bundles of it wrapped in paper bands, mostly 20s and 50s, some hundreds. It wasn't a king's ransom, but it was more money than I had ever seen in one place. Tucked in among the bundles were more envelopes. One was labeled cabin repairs, another taxes, a third simply for you, and at the very bottom, beneath all the money, was a large, sealed leather portfolio. This, I knew, was what he really wanted me to find. I sat there for a long time in the cold, dark smokehouse, the beam of my phone's light illuminating a future I never could have imagined just hours before. The silence of the woods no longer felt menacing. It felt watchful, protective. It felt like home. The first night I slept in my car, the cabin felt too much like a tomb, and I couldn't bring myself to disturb the settled dust. I locked the smokehouse door, the solid thud of the bolt echoing with a satisfying finality. I leaned my seat back, the leather cool against my skin, and watched the stars appear through the windshield, brighter and more numerous than I had ever seen them in the city. Sleep didn't come easily. My mind was a chaotic swirl of my father's words, the image of all that cash, and the lingering sting of Mark's betrayal. I kept thinking about what my father had written. He was a thief of a different sort. It was true. Mark hadn't just taken the house and the savings. He had taken my story and rewritten it to his liking, casting me as the helpless, flighty artist who needed his steady, practical hand to guide her. He'd convinced me of it too. For years I had deferred to his judgment, trusted his financial acumen, and allowed my own instincts to wither from neglect. The woman who had backpacked through Southeast Asia alone at 22 had somehow become a woman who was nervous about balancing a checkbook. How had I let that happen? The woods around me were alive with sound, the rustle of unseen creatures, the whisper of wind in the pines, the lonely hoot of an owl. It should have been frightening, but it wasn't. It felt real, elemental. In the sterile, climate-controlled world I had shared with Mark, every sound had been predictable, every risk managed. Out here there was an exhilarating sense of the unknown. I finally drifted off to a fitful sleep and woke to a world washed in the pale gray light of dawn. A thick mist clung to the ground, shrouding the trees in a soft ethereal blanket. The air was cold and clean. I got out of the car, stretching my stiff limbs. The world felt new, like it had been created just moments before. My first priority was coffee. My second was to face the cabin. I drove back into the nearest town, Stone Crossing, and found a small diner with a buzzing neon sign that said inside. A handful of old men in flannel shirts and work boots sat at the counter, nursing mugs of coffee. The waitress, a woman with a kind, tired face and a name tag that read Brenda, poured me a cup of black coffee without me having to ask. It was hot and strong and perfect. I ordered pancakes and just sat for a while, soaking in the quiet normalcy of the place. No one stared, no one asked questions. I was just another traveler passing through. It was a kind of anonymity that felt like freedom. Have you ever had a moment like that? A moment where you feel completely untethered from your old life, for better or for worse, and the future is a terrifying, exhilarating blank page. It's a feeling that's both paralyzing and powerful. If you're in a place like that right now, or you've been there, I want you to know that this community right here, the one we're building, is for you. These stories are proof that the blank page can be the greatest gift you ever receive. So stick around, subscribe, because we're just getting to the part where the real work begins. Back at the property, armed with coffee and a newfound resolve, I tackled the cabin. I threw open the door and the single window, letting the fresh morning air chase out the stale smell of decay. The work was hard and dirty. I swept away years of dust and cobwebs, scrubbed the grime from the floorboards, and wiped down every surface. The small pot-bellied stove was filled with old ash, which I shoveled into a bucket. Behind it, I found a small stack of firewood, dry and ready, left by my father. A lump formed in my throat. He had thought of everything. As I worked, I felt a shift inside me. The physical labor was grounding. Each sweep of the broom, each bucket of dirty water I tossed out the door, felt like I was clearing out not just the cabin, but my own mind. I was shedding the helplessness that had clung to me for so long. I was no longer a victim waiting to be rescued. I was a woman with a broom and a bucket of water, cleaning her own damn house. By late afternoon, the cabin was transformed. It was still rustic, still bare, but it was clean. It was habitable. I moved the cot under the window and unrolled the sleeping bag I'd had in the trunk of my car. I made a trip back to town for supplies, groceries, a new lantern, work gloves, and a heavy-duty padlock for the smokehouse. As I was paying, the hardware store owner, a man who introduced himself as George, looked at my haul. "Looks like you're moving in out at the old Hemlock place," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. I nodded. "Just for a bit, trying to fix it up." "Good," he said with a decisive nod. "Place needs a bit of life in it. Your father, he used to come in here, you know. Quiet fella, always paid in cash. Said he liked having a place to get away from it all." The casual mention of my dad sent a pang through my chest. He had a life here, a small, secret one I never knew about. He wasn't just my father. He was a man named Frank who bought nails from a man named George and paid in cash. That night, I built a fire in the stove. I sat in the cabin's single chair, eating a sandwich and watching the flames dance behind the small glass door. The little room was filled with a warm, flickering light. It was the safest I had felt in years. I hadn't opened the leather portfolio yet. I was saving it. It felt like the final chapter of my father's story, and I wasn't ready for it to end. I needed to earn it first. I needed to feel like I deserved the truths it held. For the next week, I worked. I woke with the sun and fell into bed, exhausted each night. I cleared the overgrown driveway with a scythe I bought from George. I patched the leaky cabin roof with tar and shingles. I pulled weeds until my hands were raw and my back ached. I found the well pump my father mentioned, a sturdy old hand pump, and after a few minutes of strenuous effort, it gushed forth clear, cold water. I drank straight from it, and it was the best water I had ever tasted. I was rediscovering muscles I didn't know I had, and a resilience I thought was long gone. Each completed task was a small victory, a piece of myself I was reclaiming. During a break one afternoon, sitting on the newly repaired porch steps, my phone rang. The screen flashed a number I didn't recognize, a sleek, corporate-looking area code from the city. My stomach tightened. I knew who it was before I answered. "Clara? It's Jonathan Pike, Mark's attorney." His voice was smooth, confident, the sound of expensive suits and billable hours. "We've been trying to reach you." "I've been busy," I said, my voice coming out stronger than I expected. "Yes, well, a minor issue has come to our attention. A small clerical error regarding an asset from your father's estate, a piece of land. It seems it wasn't properly disclosed during the discovery phase." My blood ran cold. How could they know? "It wasn't a marital asset," I said, quoting Ms. Davies. "It was transferred to me after the divorce was finalized." "A technicality we're prepared to challenge," he said, his voice hardening slightly. "Mark feels, and I agree, that the spirit of the settlement was a full and fair division of all assets accumulated during the marriage. The funds used to purchase said property, we contend, were marital funds, and therefore he is entitled to half its value." I looked around at the unruly forest, the humble cabin, the stone smokehouse. Half its value. The absurdity was breathtaking. "There is no value," I said, a dry laugh escaping my lips. "It's a patch of dirt and a collapsing shed." There was a pause. "Our assessors have suggested a modest value for the land, given its potential for timber development. Mark is prepared to be reasonable. He will buy out your half for $5,000. It saves us all a great deal of time and unpleasantness in court. You walk away with a check, no strings attached. $5,000. It was an insult. It was a test. He was dangling a small amount of cash in front of the poor, helpless woman he thought I was, expecting me to snatch it up gratefully. He was trying to buy my father's legacy for the price of a used car. The anger that had been simmering inside me for weeks finally boiled over. It was a clean, hot flame. "No," I said. "Excuse me? The answer is no. The property is not for sale." "Clara, I would advise you to be sensible," Pike said, his tone dripping with condescension. "You're not in a position to be sentimental. A protracted legal battle will be costly. Mark has the resources to see this through. You do not." "You seem to know a lot about my resources," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Tell your client that this property is mine. If he wants it, he can see me in court, and tell him one more thing for me. Tell him he taught me the value of a good lawyer." I hung up before he could respond. My hand was shaking, but not from fear. It was from adrenaline, from rage, from an exhilarating sense of my own power. I had stood up to them. I had said no. He had made a critical mistake. Mark, the man of spreadsheets and appraisals, had tried to put a price on something priceless. And in doing so, he had shown his hand. He didn't know about the money. He didn't know about the trunk. He just saw a loose end. Another small thing to take from me out of sheer spite. The phone call was a declaration of war, but it was also a gift. It had shattered my last remaining shred of doubt. I wasn't leaving. I wasn't selling. This place was mine to defend. That night, I knew it was time. I took the lantern and the heavy leather portfolio into the smokehouse. The air inside was still and cool. I sat on the floor, leaned against the empty trunk, and untied the leather straps. The portfolio was filled with documents, old brittle papers, carefully preserved in plastic sleeves. At the top was a letter, shorter this time, in my father's hand. "Clara," it said, "if you're reading this, it means you chose to stay. I hoped you would. What's in here is a real story. Not the one you know. It's not pretty, but it's the truth. And the truth is the only foundation worth building on." I pulled out the first document. It was a partnership agreement, dated 30 years ago, for Westwood Development Group. The partners were listed as Franklin Miller, my father, and Mark's father, Robert Peterson. I stared at the names, my mind struggling to connect them. My dad had been a hardware store owner. Mark's father was a real estate mogul, a titan of industry. I had met him a few times. He was a cold, imposing man who looked at me with thinly veiled disdain. What possible business could they have had together? I kept reading. The documents laid out a story, piece by piece. Westwood Development wasn't a success story. It was a catastrophe. They had invested in a large tract of land for a housing development, but the deal had gone sour. There were zoning issues, environmental protests, and a sudden economic downturn. They were over-leveraged and facing bankruptcy. Then came the newspaper clippings. Local developer accused of fraud. Westwood Partners under investigation for embezzlement. My father's name was there, right next to Robert Peterson's. But as I read the articles, a pattern emerged. My father was the one quoted, the one taking the heat. Peterson remained in the background, his name mentioned only in passing. The final documents were legal papers, a settlement, an agreement. My father, Franklin Miller, took full legal and financial responsibility for the failure of Westwood Development. He agreed to plead guilty to lesser charges of financial mismanagement. In exchange, all charges against Robert Peterson were dropped. My father was ruined. He lost everything, his savings, his reputation. He was barred from ever holding a director position in a company again. That's when he bought the hardware store. It wasn't a passion project. It was the only thing he could do. He had gone from being a developer, a builder, to a man selling nuts and bolts. And Robert Peterson, he walked away clean. The very next year he founded Peterson Holdings, the company that would make him a multi-millionaire. He had used my father as a shield. He had sacrificed him to save himself. My hands were numb. My whole life I had believed a story. The story was that my father was a good man but a bad businessman. A kind soul who just wasn't cut out for the cutthroat world of commerce. Mark had reinforced this narrative. He'd often spoken of my father with a sort of affectionate pity. "Your dad was too nice for his own good," he'd say. "He didn't have the killer instinct." It wasn't a lack of killer instinct, it was a sacrifice. But why? The answer was in the very last document in the portfolio. It wasn't a legal paper, it was a hospital bill, a huge one. It was dated from the same year Westwood collapsed. The patient's name was Sarah Miller, my mother. The bill was for an experimental cancer treatment, a last-ditch effort to save her life. It had cost a fortune my father didn't have, and at the bottom of the bill was a small, handwritten note, "Paid in full, R.P. Robert Peterson." It wasn't a settlement, it was a trade, my father's future for my mother's life. He had sold his name, his reputation, his entire career, for the chance to give my mother a few more months, and Robert Peterson, a man who valued everything in dollars and cents, had bought his silence. I leaned my head back against the cold stone wall of the smokehouse. The papers spread out around me. The air was thick with the ghosts of 30 years of secrets. My father wasn't a failure, he was a hero. He had made an impossible choice, a devastating sacrifice out of love. And the Petersons, both father and son, had built their empire on the ruins of my family. Mark hadn't just married me. He had acquired the daughter of the man his father had destroyed. It was a final cruel act of dominance. Our entire marriage, our entire life together had been a lie, built on a foundation of secrets and betrayal that went back decades. The rage I felt was so pure, so immense, it was almost clarifying. It burned away all the grief and self-pity, leaving behind a core of hard, unyielding steel. I finally understood. This wasn't just about a piece of land. It wasn't just about a divorce. This was about justice. It was about reclaiming a story that had been stolen from my family. My father hadn't left me a lifeboat. He'd left me a weapon. The next morning, I drove back into town, but I didn't go to the hardware store. I went to the small public library. The librarian, a woman with kind eyes and a cardigan, showed me how to use the microfiche machine. For hours, I scrolled through old copies of the Blackwood County Ledger, my eyes aching from the strain. I was looking for anything related to Westwood Development, to my father, to Robert Peterson. The local papers had covered the story in more detail than the city ones. There were photos of my dad, looking young and tired, walking out of the county courthouse. There were quotes from disgruntled local contractors who had lost money, all of them blaming my father. Robert Peterson was a ghost, mentioned only as a former business partner, but then I found it. A small article buried in the business section from 6 months after the collapse. It was about Robert Peterson securing new funding for a different project. The article mentioned, in passing, that the key investor was a man who had also been a primary creditor in the Westwood bankruptcy. He had bought up my father's debt for pennies on the dollar, and then used that leverage to become Peterson's new partner. It was a classic corporate raid, disguised as a bankruptcy. They hadn't just let my father take the fall, they had actively profited from it. I printed copies of everything. The evidence was circumstantial, but the pattern was undeniable. It was the story of a powerful man systematically destroying a weaker one and then picking over the bones. I took the copies to the diner and spread them out in a booth, a fresh cup of coffee at my elbow. Brenda, the waitress, refilled my cup without a word, her expression one of quiet empathy. It was as if she understood I was wrestling with something important. I called Ms. Davies. I explained everything, my voice low and steady as I walked her through the documents, the hospital bill, the newspaper articles. I told her about the phone call from Mark's lawyer. She was silent for a long time after I finished. I could hear the faint sound of her breathing on the other end of the line. "Clara," she said finally, and her voice had lost its usual professional detachment. It was filled with a weary respect. "Your father was a remarkable man." "He was," I said, my throat tight. "The question is, what can we do with this?" "The original fraud case is long past the statute of limitations," she said, her lawyerly brain kicking back into gear. "And proving a conspiracy to defraud between Peterson and his creditors after all this time would be nearly impossible. But that's not our goal. Our goal is to get Mark to back off. And for that, this is a canon." "What do you mean?" "Mark and his father have spent 30 years building the Peterson Holdings brand. It's built on an image of integrity, of shrewd but fair dealing. This story, if it were to become public, a story about how the family fortune was founded on the deliberate ruin of a partner who was just trying to save his dying wife. That story is devastating. It wouldn't just be a corporate scandal. It would be a human tragedy. The press would have a field day." A slow, cold smile spread across my face. "So we leak it." "We don't have to," Miss Davies said. "We just have to make them think we will. We file a countersuit. We claim intentional infliction of emotional distress. We claim the current legal action is a continuation of a decades-long pattern of predatory behavior by the Peterson family against the Miller family. We subpoena Robert Peterson. We request all documents related to the dissolution of Westwood. We make it very, very public and very, very messy." She paused. "It's a bluff, Clara, but it's a powerful one. They have everything to lose. You've already lost it all. That makes you dangerous." "Do it," I said, without a moment's hesitation. The days that followed were a strange mixture of peaceful labor and anxious waiting. I continued my work on the property. I planted a small vegetable garden in a sunny patch near the cabin. I cleared a walking path through the woods down to a small, trickling creek. I bought a comfortable chair for the porch and sat out in the evenings, listening to the symphony of the forest and watching the fireflies begin their nightly dance. I was putting down roots, both literally and figuratively. I was building a life here, on this small patch of earth my father had saved for me. Every swing of the hammer, every shovelful of dirt was an act of defiance. I was taking something that had been born from ruin and making it whole again. I was doing the same for myself. The property was changing, and so was I. My hands were calloused, my face tanned by the sun. I felt stronger, clearer than I had in years. I had stopped thinking of myself as Mark's ex-wife. I was Frank Miller's daughter, and I was the owner of 14 Hemlock Lane. I didn't hear anything for a week. The silence from the city was unnerving. I started to wonder if we had overplayed our hand, if Mark's arrogance was so great that he would call our bluff. Then, one evening, as I was washing my dinner dishes in a basin of water I'd heated on the stove, a sleek, black car I didn't recognize pulled into my newly cleared driveway. My body went rigid. I watched from the cabin window as a man in a perfectly tailored suit got out. It wasn't Mark, and it wasn't his lawyer. It was Robert Peterson. He looked older than I remembered, his hair now a distinguished silver, but he carried himself with the same rigid, intimidating posture. He walked slowly up to the cabin, his expensive leather shoes looking absurdly out of place in the dirt and weeds. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and looked at me through the screen door. "Clara," he said. His voice was gravelly, accustomed to command. I didn't answer. I just stood there, my hands still wet, my heart pounding a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. "May I come in?" he asked. "No," I said. The word was quiet but firm. He seemed taken aback, as if he wasn't used to being told no. He stood there for a moment, his jaw tight. "Your lawyer contacted my lawyer," he said. "She made some outrageous allegations." "They're not allegations," I said. "They're facts. I have the documents." He sighed, a long, weary sound. He looked around at the property, at the patched roof of the cabin, at the solid, unyielding stone of the smokehouse. His gaze lingered on the smokehouse. "Your father was a good man," he said, his voice softer now. "A better man than me. What happened back then, it was a complicated time. I did what I had to do to survive." "You did what you had to do to get rich," I corrected him. "You sacrificed him. You used his grief and his desperation to build your empire. And then your son tried to pick the last remaining flesh from the bones." A flicker of something, shame perhaps or just annoyance, crossed his face. He reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a long white envelope. "Mark will be dropping his claim to this property," he said, his voice returning to its businesslike tone. "This is a cashier's check. Consider it reparations for the past. It's a significant sum. Enough to let you start over anywhere you want." He held the envelope out to me. I looked from the envelope to his face. I thought about the money in the trunk. I thought about my father's letter. This isn't just a place, it's a choice. Robert Peterson was offering me the easy way out. Take the money, disappear, and let the past stay buried. It was the same deal he had offered my father in a different form. Hush money, a way to clean the slate with a checkbook. But I wasn't my father. I hadn't been backed into a corner by grief and fear. I was standing on my own land. I had my own resources, and I knew the truth. "I don't want your money," I said. I opened the screen door and walked out onto the porch, forcing him to take a step back. We were face to face now, the evening light casting long shadows between us. "I want you to leave. And I want you to tell your son that if he or anyone associated with him ever contacts me again, ever sets foot on this property again, the story of Westwood Development, complete with copies of every single document, goes to the front page of the city paper. Am I clear?" He stared at me, his cold blue eyes searching my face. He was assessing me just as he had assessed my father 30 years ago. But what he saw was not a man he could break. He saw a woman who had already been broken and had put herself back together with stronger materials. He saw his mistake. He saw my father's daughter. He slowly lowered the hand holding the envelope. He gave a single curt nod. "Clear," he said. He turned without another word, got back in his car, and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust hanging in the quiet evening air. I stood on the porch until the sound of his engine had completely faded, replaced by the familiar chorus of the crickets. I hadn't taken his money. I hadn't won a lawsuit. There was no public vindication. But I had won. I'd won back my family's dignity. I had stared down the ghosts that had haunted us for 30 years, and I had not flinched. I walked over to the smokehouse, the solid, secret heart of this place. I rested my hand on the cool, rough stones. This was more than property. It was a monument to a father's love. It was a testament to the fact that true value can't be measured in dollars or acres. It's measured in sacrifice, in integrity, in the choices we make when everything is on the line. The smokehouse had kept its secrets for a quarter of a century. Now, it was my turn to be its guardian. A few months have passed since that evening. The chill of autumn is beginning to creep into the air, turning the leaves on the maple trees to brilliant shades of crimson and gold. The garden I planted yielded a small but satisfying harvest of tomatoes and zucchini. I've made progress on the cabin, insulating the walls and installing a small solar panel system on the roof for electricity. I have lights, I have a small refrigerator, I have a laptop and a satellite internet connection. The money from the trunk is in a bank account in town, managed by a financial advisor who treats me not as a flighty artist, but as a savvy investor. I'm learning, I'm growing. I've started drawing again. For the first time in years, my subjects are the trees, the changing light, the texture of stone and wood. My work is stronger, more honest, than it has ever been. I've gotten to know some of the locals, George from the hardware store, Brenda from the diner. They've accepted me into their quiet world with a simple, undemanding kindness. They don't know my whole story, but they don't need to. They just know me as Clara, the woman who's fixing up the old Miller place. I never heard from Mark or his father again. Miss Davies confirmed that the legal claim was officially withdrawn. The silence from that part of my life is a relief, like the quiet after a long and painful fever has broken. Sometimes I think about Mark. I don't feel anger anymore, or even sadness. I just feel a kind of distant pity. He is trapped in a world of appraisals and acquisitions, A world where everything has a price and nothing has any value. He will never know the wealth of sitting on your own porch, a porch you fixed with your own 2 hands, and watching the sun set over trees that belonged to no one but the sky. My father left me a choice. He said I could sell this place and leave, or I could stay and build. I realize now he left me a third option, the one I've taken. I'm not just staying, I'm healing. I'm not just building a home, I'm rebuilding myself. This land, this smokehouse, they didn't just save me from poverty. They saved me from a story that someone else had written for me. They gave me back my own. And that's a lesson I want to share with all of you. Your story is yours to write. There will be people who try to take the pen from your hand, who try to tell you who you are, what you're worth, what you're capable of. Don't let them. Sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden in the places no one else thinks to look, the places they've deemed worthless. Sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't money or property, but a truth that sets you free. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight to reclaim your own narrative, I hope you'll subscribe and become part of this community. Share your own experiences in the comments below. I read them all. Because every story of resilience, every story of a second chance, is a light.
H2O underwater. Also, Ezzy, you should have spelled it like Naur. Okay. Oh, I need rare Pokemetals. Okay, good to know. We'll bring some back. Let's see. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh god, Emma, not you and Nelly. Okay, I'm gonna grab some more water. I'll be right back, guys.